Hello again. Well, that was a fantastic speech from Jan from the Netherlands, and obviously the tech has, we're doing the best we can with the international speakers coming in, but we've now got a couple of local speakers. I mentioned in my intro that we've got Dr. Tanya Notley and Associate Professor Michael Dezuanni with us today. They have been enormously instrumental in really lifting the game in terms of identifying, articulating media literacy here. So we're going to hear first from Tanya. For 20 years, Dr. Tanya Notley has collaborated with human rights, community media and social justice organisations to design and develop projects that use media and communication to address inequality and to contribute to social changes. And the librarians listening to this will feel very united with that approach. Associate Professor Michael Dezuanni is the Associate Professor of QUT's Digital Media Research Centre, which provides world-leading research for a creative, inclusive and fair digital media environment. Again, words that we really appreciate from the library sector. So I'd like to introduce Tanya and Michael and their presentations.
Hi everyone. I really wish I could see you all. I hope you are doing well today. It's really great to be with you. I'd like to start by paying my respects to the Pambalang clan of the Awabakal Nation where I'm located today. And I want to pay a huge thank you to Sue Makaracha and to Alia for organising this event, which I'm really excited to be part of. And I would actually like to start this presentation with a video to help us all consider what is the value of news to young people. So fingers crossed that it's going to play without too much lag. It's not always easy in Zoom, but let's have a try.
Well, news is important for young Australians because it's how we interact with the world around us and gain a global awareness that's beyond just our school or local community.
News is important to young Australians as it prepares them for when they are adults so they are informed citizens and can vote accordingly.
It's really important because it's a key connection with young Australians and the rest of the community. And it keeps us together. It's a way of keeping together in contact with each other.
It gives young Australians a snapshot of the outside world and inspires them to seek and explore beyond their local community and to help others who are in need outside of just their country or their town.
News helps young Australians develop their own opinions separate from their families and from school, and helps us learn how society functions.
I think it's important to have not only a local but also a global consciousness to allow us to make informed decisions in the best interest of everyone.
I think news is really important because it helps you in mostly every aspect of life, whether it's finding a job, buying a property or even travelling. So I think it's really important.
News is important for young Australians because to be able to win arguments against our parents that we like to do as teenagers, you need to go on the news to be able to win that argument. Because my dad is a very good arguer, and so got to get all the info.
Well, I think as young Australians emerging into adult society, we need to be educated about the world to best contribute to the world.
So news is important to young Australians for so many reasons. And this video was taken last October during Media Literacy Week at an event we organised with ABC Education and the Museum of Australian Democracy at Old Parliament House called News Champion Forum. We brought together 21 young Australians aged 10 to 17. They were from every state and territory in Australia. And we worked with them over 3 days to support them to become news champions who are able to lead discussions about the future of news in their own communities. And let me add here a big thanks to ABC Education who made that video, which is one of a number of videos and slides about young people and news, which is included in the exhibition that was mentioned earlier at the Museum of Australian Democracy called Truth, Power and Free Press, which I highly recommend. As organisers of the News Champion Forum event, we learned a huge amount. Importantly, our hypothesis that lots of young Australians, certainly not all, are really passionate about news and they really want to be involved in its future was absolutely confirmed. As part of the event evaluation, all 21 participants wrote detailed testimonials about their experience. You can see one on the screen right now. And these testimonials were so humbling for us because so many of the participants said that this was a life-changing event for them. We would love others to use this news champion model that we developed to engage young Australians around news and media literacy. So if anyone's interested, we've fully documented our process from seeking applicants to our budget, our program, and our event evaluation. Of course, having a News Champions Forum like the one we had with participants from every state is absolutely impossible at the moment, but something like this can happen at different scales, at local events, at online events. And I'm super excited to say that yesterday, a librarian who is here at this event today let us know that she would like to organise an event like this week for Media Literacy Week. So that's fantastic. Let me move out a little bit now to explain the context of the News Champions Forum. Michael Dezuanni and I have been researching young Australians in the news for the past 3 years. And today we're going to present to you findings from our most recent project, Advancing the News Media Literacy of Young Australians, which was funded by our own universities alongside the Museum of Australian Democracy and Google Australia. Now, the project examined the practices, the needs, the experiences of young Australians who are school-aged, and it's just wrapped up after 18 months. Michael and I are actually both working on an adult media literacy project at the moment, but today we want to talk about this project and we want to focus on young people under 18, and we want to share what we've learned through our research. Besides the News Champion event, as part of this project, we carried out a series of research interventions. So today we want to share with you key findings from these 3 reports you can see here on the screen. And in particular, we want to focus on what these studies tell us about young people's news media literacy, both their needs and also opportunities for different interventions. So I'm going to speak to just one of these studies before passing over to Michael. Between February to March this year, we surveyed a nationally representative sample of more than 1,000 young Australians aged 8 to 16 to understand their news engagement practices and their experiences. And this survey repeats one that we did back in 2017. So we've been able to compare the data over that time. So I'm going to talk to our top 3 findings that I think are relevant to the work that all of you are doing. To provide a snapshot of news consumption, we asked young Australians where they got their news stories from on the previous day. And we found that 88% had received news from at least one source. And this had increased a lot since 2017, perhaps because when we collected the data, it was at the very early days of COVID-19, so it may have had an influence on our results. Family were, as with 2017, by far the most common source of news, with 54% of young people saying that, reporting that they'd heard news stories from their family on the previous day. And this was followed by television, a school teacher, friends, social media networks, radio, a website or mobile app, and in last place by a long way was newspapers, though of course young people get news from newspapers, just not in that old school paper form. When we compare the results of our survey from 2017, we find that news media is being consumed more frequently and in more socially mediated ways. So we found that young Australians received more news from family, from teachers, from friends, but also online, especially through social media. And it won't be a big surprise to you that teens use social media sites to get news and news headlines and news stories much more than children. However, both groups were using social media platforms considerably to get news more when compared with 2017. Now for teens, Instagram is the most popular social media site for getting news, with 49% saying they get their news this way, and that was followed by Facebook and then YouTube. For children, YouTube was on top, with 31% using it to get news, followed by Facebook and then Instagram. And we were surprised to see how much the social media platforms of choice for children and teens for getting news have changed since 2017, with the rise of Instagram being the most significant change. And that's actually a finding that's mirrored in a study of adults by the News and Media Research Centre at the University of Canberra. They found for adult Australians the use of Instagram was also increasing, and that a quarter of millennials were using it to get news, which is significant, but only about half of what the teens were in our study. So I think that this is an important and a really interesting shift. News on Instagram looks very different to Facebook and Twitter news consumption. It's more visual often for a start, but also it often includes things that we might not have previously classified as news. But perhaps most importantly, on Instagram, you can't click through to the news story to check and verify claims as facts to see the full context of the story. Instead, news and, of course, misinformation and disinformation are passed on relationally. So through influencers, through friends, through people that you're following. And these people might personalize news, they might summarize it, or they might dismiss or counter it, as is the case with the problematic example that's on the screen now. I think the relational news engagement that's enabled through social media platforms is something that will absolutely continue to grow. And the benefits are that people may engage with stories they wouldn't otherwise have. They may hear about lived experience of news events, and in that way they may become more mobilised to act on news, to become active citizens on the issues that matter to them. And some of the negatives, though, are that they may trust the wrong people to deliver the news. They may encounter and be influenced more by disinformation than they otherwise would have, and they may be less equipped and indeed less able to carry out actions that would support them to critique and verify news and information. And that's a real problem, because we know from other studies that people's ability to verify, navigate information and then verify reliable information may be the greatest determinant of their ability to distinguish false information from real news. I really believe that librarians in particular already do and can play an incredible role in addressing misinformation by increasing young people's information literacy, given that this is clearly a key area that we need to focus on. The challenge is that I think it's important that we understand that news media literacy education has to adapt to the way news is being experienced on different social media platforms if it's to be relevant at a time when young people are most likely to get their news in a socially mediated way, either via social media or offline via family and friends. News, of course, has always been socially mediated, but I do think when new kinds of actors deliver news via social media, ideas about news start to become transformed, our expectations of news change, and our ability to be news literate is both challenged and altered. And this really matters because our survey finds that misinformation and disinformation is not being adequately challenged by most young Australians. We asked all our respondents if they know how to tell fake news stories from real news stories, and less than half felt they are able to do this. We also asked those who are getting news from social media if they take out any of a series of actions that would help them to reduce the likelihood they receive and believe misinformation and disinformation. And we found that fewer than half of young Australians were doing any of these activities on a regular basis. The activity young people were most likely to do by far was to discuss news stories with someone they trust when they're a bit unsure if they're true or not. And this highlights that not only has news engagement interpersonal and social, but so are news literacy behaviours, primarily interpersonal and social. And I think this provides us with really important clues about how we have to rethink media literacy education to address the issue of misinformation and disinformation. Our third key finding from this study relates to news media literacy education in schools. Just 1 in 5 young Australians said they had received a lesson during the past year to help them decide whether news stories are true and can be trusted. And this was the same for children and teens. And fewer young Australians said they had received any lessons in school to help them create their own news stories when compared with 2017. So together, these findings suggest that young Australians are not receiving the news media literacy education they need, and news media literacy education is not increasing in the way we would expect, given the current anxiety around the impact of misinformation on our society. So this study really bolsters our belief that more efforts are needed to ensure that all young Australians receive effective news media literacy education. And with that, I'll pass over to Michael to explain key findings from the other 2 studies.
Thanks so much, Tanya. So if I could just ask you to, stop sharing your screen, and I'll just switch over now to my screen. Just be 1 second while I do that. Okay, excuse me for just 1 minute. There we go. Okay, so following on from Tanya's presentation, we've completed these 3 different studies. The study of young Australians to really get a sense of young Australians' consumption of news and their experiences of news literacy and so on. We've conducted this snapshot study, which is a focus on the representation of young people in news media. And we've also conducted a study of teachers and what teachers think about the implementation of news literacy and media literacy in the classroom. The reason we were super keen to conduct this snapshot study was because one of the things that young people told us from the national survey was that they felt like news wasn't really relevant to them because they didn't see themselves in the news. They felt like they were underrepresented in news media. And certainly, anecdotally, we kind of knew that that was true. We had a sense that, you know, if you watch a television news broadcast or if you, you know, turn on the TV news at night, then it's less likely that you'll see young people being represented than adults. So we wanted to test this out in a bit more detail and therefore conducted this national snapshot study. So this was a study of one unremarkable day in the Australian news cycle. And it's adapted from a bigger study called Who Makes the News Global Study. And essentially the idea is that you take a day in a news cycle and you try to identify how frequently a group or is being represented. So in our case, we, on this unremarkable day in 2019, we conducted an analysis of 201 newspaper stories and in 8 Australian newspapers. And that was across a range of newspapers, both metropolitan and regional. And it was also across different news ownership as well, across the Fairfax and Murdoch press, for instance. And then we also looked at 75 news stories across 4 national news broadcasts, again, across the networks and including the ABC. So it was, you know, it is just one day. So, you know, we have to take the results with some degree of, we have to put bounds around what we can claim about the findings. And, you know, if we wanted to get a more comprehensive understanding, we would need to do a longer study. But nonetheless, this does provide us with some pretty stark data and in some respects some quite kind of almost disturbing data. So we saw that stories about young people's needs and key issues are absolutely underrepresented in the news. Only 3% of stories were about issues which affect large numbers of young people. And along with that, we saw that where young people were being represented, it was often in relation to social welfare stories or things like accidents and so on, sometimes sports stories, but rarely were these stories about issues like the economy or society or even the environment. Along with that, young people's voices are very much absent from the news. So across all of those stories, we only saw that 1% of the stories directly quoted a young person. And also that young people were included in images far more often than they were included in the written or spoken substance of a story. So in other words, they were very much seen but not heard. So, you know, typical examples would be where there might be a story about the economy, say, and you see a picture of a family, which includes children, but the children are not, they don't get an opportunity to speak in the story. They're not quoted in the story, and frequently they're not even named in the story. So for us, this is really important evidence to speak back to that question of whether or not young people do have a presence in the news on a daily basis, and whether or not the news is relevant to them. And, you know, we've really, when we have the opportunity, we really encourage news organisations and journalists to work a bit harder to include young people in their news stories. The other thing that we've produced as part of this work is a toolkit. So we wanted to provide teachers and students with some resources that they could use to conduct their own snapshot study if they want to. So you can see the website there. If you just do a general search for media literacy, Western Sydney University, you should be able to find the website and then find the snapshot resources. But essentially the toolkit takes students through a similar process to what we went through to try to identify how young people are being represented in the news. All right, I'll move on to the other study then that I want to talk about, which is our online survey conducted between November 2019 and February 2020 of approximately 295 teachers. And we wanted to talk to teachers to try and understand that disconnect that we were seeing again from the national survey of young people. And Tanya pointed out those figures, those what we perceive to be quite low figures of opportunities young people are having to undertake news literacy lessons at school, either in terms of analysis or making their own news. So we really wanted to try and understand teachers' perspectives on that, and to see whether or not teachers are valuing news literacy, and where the barriers to implementing news literacy opportunities might be. This is not a representative survey in the sense that it's not representative of all teachers, although the 295 teachers did come from a variety of different kinds of schools across all states, across primary and secondary schools, and so on. So although it's not statistically representative, it does give us a fairly wide range of perspectives coming from the teaching community. So of those teachers then, it was really encouraging to see that 96% of teachers do believe it's either very or extremely important to teach about the news, and the kinds of things that they were suggesting should be focused on are things like fact checking or learning about bias in the news. And in the report, there's a range of other topics that they are also identified as being important. However, on the other hand, although teachers do see this to be important, there are some challenges and some barriers. So although some teachers do feel confident in teaching about the news, only 27% said that they felt very well supported by their school to teach about news, and only 18% said that they had access to professional development about news media. And we would see those as being fairly low levels. They identified time for planning and a crowded curriculum as being significant barriers to implementing news literacy more often. And a significant number of teachers, about 36%, said that the Australian curriculum places little or no emphasis on teaching about the news. So we know that with the Australian curriculum, both particularly within the English curriculum and within the media arts curriculum, there are opportunities for news literacy and media literacy more generally to be implemented and supported by the curriculum. But a quite significant number of teachers are not seeing that the curriculum provides those opportunities, or that it places emphasis on teaching about the news. Okay, so I'm going to move away now from those reports, and I'm very happy to pick up on any questions that there might be about those studies in the Q&A. But I just wanted to spend a couple of minutes on this media literacy framework that we've been developing. And Jan Muller mentioned earlier that the Australian Media Literacy Alliance has been developing an approach to media literacy education broadly, and that the Netherlands also had developed this kind of broad framework that was used on a national level for supporting media literacy. And so as part of our work, we've been trying to achieve something similar. And so even though this first project that we've been working on has been quite specifically about news literacy, this framework is about media literacy more generally. So this is the definition that we're working with for media literacy. That media literacy is the ability to critically engage with media in all aspects of life. It's a form of lifelong literacy that is essential for full participation in society. And then breaking this down further, media literacy is required for all of these things, for receiving, verifying and sharing information, for getting help and advice when it's needed, for conducting business and finding work, for learning and study, for participating in communities, engaging with democracy, meeting people, relaxing and being entertained, sharing ideas, knowledge and experiences and opinions, and creating engaging and effective media. And there's a mix of things there across information getting through to things like entertainment and leisure, because we think that media literacy is really important for all of those things. We then have these 10 media literacy learning outcomes that are arranged around reflecting, understanding, using and achieving. So reflecting on, so a media literate citizen reflects on their own media use, is curious about how media are made, knows that media influence and impact people and society, knows that a range of institutions impact media participation, understands that media construct versions of reality, uses technologies to consume and produce media, can use and critique a variety of media formats, communicates using the language conventions of a variety of media forms, and then successfully manages personal, social and public relationships using media, and confidently achieves personal objectives and goals through media. And what we're hoping is that this set of learning outcomes really comes to underpin efforts around media literacy, so that we see consistency across efforts, both within schools, but also in society more generally, whether this is for young people or for adults. One of the things we would like to suggest is that if we have this nationally consistent approach, and that we have these goals across all efforts around media literacy, then we're more likely to be successful overall. There's a third part to this, which I won't go into in detail now, because it gets into some of the detail in a bit more specifically. But all of this, we would suggest, is underpinned by a conceptual framework for thinking about media. So the ultimate goal, if you like, is for people to understand that we can apply different frameworks or different ways of thinking about media to be critically reflective on media, whether we're using the media or creating it. And this framework, then, these concepts are developed around technologies, representations, audiences, institutions, languages, and relationships. So all of this comes together in a poster. If you're interested, you can download a poster version of these 3 sections that are all on the one document to provide a reminder of what media literacy is perhaps trying to achieve. And with that, I'm going to say thank you because we would like to leave some time for questions. And that's the website if you would like to read up on our various research efforts or access the resources and tools that we've been sharing with you today. Please go to the Western Sydney University website, which is /media literacy at the end of the standard university website. So I'll leave it there and open up for questions.
Thank you so much, Michael, and thank you, Tanya. That was absolutely excellent. And you really showed us how you've got under the skin of media literacy. I will just let everybody know that the website medialiteracy.org.au, if you go there, you'll see some of this great work and you'll be able to download the poster. I also just want to mention that obviously ACARA is at that point where it's reviewing the curriculum, and I know, Michael, that you've had some involvement with that. Before I go on to another question, can I just ask what level of success you think there might be with this review to put media literacy in there more strongly?
Yeah, thanks, Sue. I think that from what my understanding, ACARA is wanting to take a light touch approach to redeveloping the curriculum in the sense that the substance of the curriculum that exists now will remain the substance of the curriculum, but they're very interested in making it much easier for teachers to access the materials and to really be able to get to the key ideas that they should be teaching about in a much easier and clearer way. When it comes to media arts in the curriculum, they're absolutely open to being more responsive to the idea of critical media literacy. Media arts at the moment has an emphasis towards making and creative production because it's part of the arts. There is a responding strand within that curriculum that encourages critical thinking, but I know that Australian Teachers of Media, for instance, is going to be advocating for a stronger emphasis on that responding component to align more clearly with the kinds of media literacy questions that we've been talking about today.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you, Michael. And I might throw this one to Tanya. So one of the questions we have is, what initiatives would you like to see in schools to increase young people's level of news media literacy?
Thanks very much for the question. You will be hearing about a couple of initiatives later today from ABC Education, who have absolutely been doing pioneering work, and from Alana and Madeline Foundation. So I'll leave to them to kind of describe their important work that they're doing there. I think that, you know, there are a number of barriers that we need to consider. And one of them is still there's filtering systems in so many schools, which prevent the use of the very social media systems that are a primary way young people are getting news. So I think we have to address these kinds of issues and allow teachers to be able to engage with news consumption in the primary ways that young people are getting news. But also, you know, I think that it's interesting for us to be reminded through our study that the number one most likely, most preferred way for young people to get news is with their families. And so we've got a lot that we can learn there about how you support young people to engage in discussions, sometimes complex and sensitive discussions around misinformation in family and friendship circles. And a lot of that will really translate to social media spaces as well. So I think we would love to see a lot more initiatives. We would love to see a lot more connections with newsrooms, which is really doesn't happen anymore due to, you know, massive funding cuts in newsrooms. So I think there's not one thing. I think we need lots of different types of things for students.
Thank you, Tanya. And thank you, Michael. There's so much more we could talk about, but I think that's a really good taster of the research, the evidence base that says we really must be going in this direction. So thank you very much.